Abreekin is by far the largest of Briskillanya's continents in terms of area, being 1.22 times larger than the other three continents combined, and solidarily making up 53.2% of the planet's land area, almost as big of a share that Eurasia has on Earth. Unlike the other continents, which are all composed of a single tectonic plate each, Abreekin is composed of four major tectonic plates: the Huaypervanachian, Oriental, Tribunotatian, and Azertachi plates, or five if you count the Briskillanya plate. The frequent interactions between these plates and the interference of the surrounding oceanic plates are responsible for Abreekin's large amount of topography. Most of the mountains in the continent's southernmost parts were formed volcanically by the Rhochian plate subducting underneath the Huaypervanachian and Oriental plates. The Huaypervanachian plate is bounded to the north and east by mountains due to converging with the Tribunotatian and Oriental plates. The Oriental and Tribunotatian plates have collided in Reveta, creating more mountains that are now aging as the plates are no longer colliding. Oceanic subduction from the Briskillanya and Kaunjar plates also creates the mountains in northwest Laval and western Ayanias. The Briskillanya and Paidin islands were all formed in the same way, as they are volcanic islands formed by an underlying hotspot. On the topic of climate, Strohpervanach is a rather cool peninsula due to its polar location, even possessing tundra. The peninsula's east is kept cold and dry by the Strohpervanachian mountains that also trap moisture in the region's west, the part of the peninsula where most people live, giving it its oceanic climate. The Strohpervanachian mountains also cut off the eastern half of the peninsula from outside interaction, making the region a remote one. Aachen is a mostly flat, temperate nation. In stark contrast, Aachen southeast contains some of the most volcanically active areas on Briskillanya's surface, including some areas that have seen so much volcanism that they've been reduced to plains of igneous rock. The Aachenian south is dominated by cool climates, while the flat north, including Aachen's capital of Aachen City, is mostly Mediterranean, also including some cool arid and semi-arid areas. The country also contains oceanic portions and extends south enough to contain some subarctic areas. Most Aachenians live west of the arid northeast and north of the colder parts of the south, which are densely forested. Ayanias, on average, is the hottest country on Briskillanya due to the country's nearly equatorial position, lack of vertical spread, flatness, and low altitude. Ayanias also has rather exceptional bodies of water. If you do not consider it to just be a bay, then Lake Aini is the biggest lake on Briskillanya, and the Aini River is very broad and easily navigable for a river. Most parts of the country south of the Aini River are desertic and diffusely inhabited, being dominated by the Laini Desert, while the north is much more wet and densely inhabited, and includes several rainforests. There are some arid areas in the far northwest because of the rain shadow effect produced by mountains in the area. The Ayanian population is primarily crowded around the Aini River, where the capital of Vivde can be found, and becomes more diffuse the further one goes from the river. Next is one of the harshest areas on Briskillanya's surface, the Central Desert. Kept a hot desert by its extreme distance from any oceans, the lack of rivers in the region, and the rain-shadowing mountains flanking it from the east and south, this region is home to the highest temperatures Abreekin ever experiences, though the humid equatorial regions are hotter on average as they stay warm at night, and is incredibly arid. Because of this, the Central Desert never had an indigenous population besides briefly the Desertcastians, who spent most of their time in the outer, milder parts of the desert, and early humans, who don't really count because the Central Desert wasn't even a desert when they lived there. Today, Ayanias doesn't want the Central Desert because of its dryness. Laval is cut off from it by the thick Anthracite mountains to the desert's east, and already finds its own enormous territory challenging enough to govern. And Revetans primarily live in the cool, wet north of their country, and still have little interest in such a scorched, desiccated place. And Reveta's pacifistic, anti-nationalistic foreign policy also discourages actions like expansion. The only country, then, to have any significant interest in the Central Desert is Wimvar, but Wimvari discussion on the desert has a tendency of descending into squabbles about who should get what in it. Speaking of Wimvar, just as the Kingdom of Wimtashia Varia is culturally and politically both of northern and western Abreekin, it is uncoincidentally climatically home to a transition between Abreekin's tropical and temperate zones. The south is hot and mountainous, even having some rainforest in the low-lying and coastal areas. These parts are very rural, but more densely populated than the also mountainous Tashai Desert, a more habitable extension of the Central Desert to the north. This desert includes Desertcast, of course, and most of western Varia, central Wimtashia, and Verakachian Tashai. The vast majority, about 90% of the Wimvari population lives north of the desert. Much of the Wimvari north consists of the Mediterranean, like Boche, Ithaca, South Peninsulista, and small parts of the two major constituents, and humid continental, like most of Varia and the northern parts of Wimtashia, climates. And the Wimvari capital of Maifwe is located in the latter. Wimvar's north is also decently mountainous. These mountains cool the region and provide borders for the Ithic tribes and two major constituents. Much of the Wimvari northwest has rough terrain, including Ithaca, which is notorious for its very defensible terrain of thick forest, hills, and marshes, which historically kept the region independent. Boche, including its parts that are not high enough to register as highlands on this map, is very rugged and rocky, which complicated communication and trade. This is why Boche spent most of its history as a group of city-states. Varia and Wimtashia are generally a lot flatter than their western neighbors. Trebina is a remarkably cold and rugged nation. Trebina's mountainous nature historically protected the area from invasion, but also makes it difficult to build systems of transport for the large country. The western part of the country, besides the Mediterranean and decently urban Peninsulista, the warmest and most densely populated part of Trebina, is the mountainous and very diffusely inhabited land of Marcan, an offshoot of the Aitutaki Plateau. Some of the northerly and inland parts of Marcan are generally considered uninhabitable. The north of the remaining part of Trebina is dominated by mountainous and hilly terrain, as well as a great, dense, mostly untouched boreal forest that only has a handful of cities within it. The country also contains a few cold deserts and steppes, which are nearly unpopulated. This leaves the oceanic and continental portions of Trebina, which are still rather diffusely populated west of the Phrygia Mountains, meaning that most Trebinans live in this rather comparably small area of land. The Trebinan capital of Terbin can be found in the oceanic portion. Between the modernized and industrial countries of Trebina and Azertach is an enormous region with no permanent human population whatsoever, the frigid, mountainous Azertachi Plateau. Despite being closer to the equator than Azertach, the Azertachi Plateau is colder due to its extreme elevations, the highest ones found on the planet. Significant portions of the plateau are so cold that they remain frozen year-round. This region is too harsh for large, hairless, omnivorous animals like humans, but perfect for small, furry, herbivorous animals like the Phrynias, who are the dominant species of the plateau for want of humans. However, even they avoid the dry and incredibly cold plateauan interior. Trebina and Azertach have little interest in making the plateau integral parts of their nations, but both countries do patrol the region to map it and prevent malicious actors from taking up residence there, and rising interest exists in building a trans-Azertachi Plateau railroad. The fact that Azertach is inhabited is honestly miraculous. First, due to its proximity to the plateau the country was named after, much of Azertach has rough terrain and rocky soil. This greatly hampers large-scale agriculture and transportation. Secondly, and more importantly, Azertach is very cold, by far the coldest country on the planet, because no part of Azertach lies further than 30 degrees from the Briskillanya North Pole. Azertach's boreal location gives it only 3 unique climates, making it climatically the least diverse country on the planet. These 3 are the cold subarctic climate in the east of the country, the very cold tundra climate in the west, and the permanently sub-zero ice-cap climate in the far north Paschan Islands, the only significant landmasses on the planet to always be part of either polar ice cap. Azertach's wintry nature made Azertach uninhabited by humans for most of its history, keeps it as Briskillanya's least populous country, and acts to preserve vast stretches of the Azertachi wilderness. There are significant stretches of territory in Azertach, especially in the west, center, and north, that have never had a human enter them. Because most of the country is so inhospitable, over half of its population lives in the subarctic national capital of Liefye. Raveta is a bit of an enigma. It predominantly has a humid continental climate, has a wide coast, has several rivers, and mostly has flat terrain, so by all means it should be one of the more densely populated of the Briskillanyan countries, yet it has fewer people than the small insular Isatanam and the cold, rough Trebina. There is no real reason behind this besides a strange stroke of random chance. Raveta does have some mountainous coverage, but most of these mountains are old and relatively small. Raveta's population strongly skews north, close to Trebina, and the north is where the oceanic capital of the country, Nuer, could be found. Fitting Raveta's nature as a maritime country, Raveta's coast is also comparably densely populated, and the population density falls as one goes inland until it plummets nearly to zero in the desertic southwest. For this reason, the coast to north are often called inner Raveta, and the inland parts are often called outer Raveta. Because of Raveta's flatness and it being surrounded by more defensible areas, it historically had a tendency of falling within the spheres of influences of its nearby regions. Isatanab is the only country on Briskillanya to have no part of it be part of a continent. Instead, it occupies the islands of the Briskillanya archipelago. It is being discussed here for the sake of simplicity. Isatanab has 10 islands large enough to show up on this map. The main island of Solhant, which makes up around 70% of the archipelago's land area, Tiny Ros, then Proj, Kavniter, Aisk, Alera, Lysosa, Dwerak, the second largest island of Huridai, and Rimskodai. Owing to their volcanic formations, each of these islands has tectonically active highlands in the middle and lowlands on the outside. As one goes counterclockwise through the Lesser Briskillian chain, the islands get newer, and this can be seen by the island's central mountains getting taller. Isatanab, due to it being so marine and spread out, has a diverse climate for a country of its size. Both the subtropical and the subarctic climates are contained in Briskillanya's smallest country. The Isatanabian population is more evenly spread out than the populations in most countries, as the population only really avoids the cold desert, inner highlands, and boreal forest, which all make up rather slim parts of the country. Isatanab is the most densely populated of any country on the planet. Solhant is by far the most populous island, mostly due to its great size, and its subtropical portion contains the kingdom's capital of Deminab. Vinkla is, for the most part, a remarkably flat country. It is a mostly temperate, climatically diverse one, but is mostly dominated by the Mediterranean and subtropical climates. Vinkla is an agricultural powerhouse due to these factors, making most of the country's area rural. The population of Vinkla, while somewhat concentrated in the Mediterranean capital city of Aisa, is rather evenly spread out due to the presence of other prominent cities dotting the country. The population density only significantly drops in the north. The Vinklan climate zones correlate remarkably well, compared to other countries, to the cultural regions within the country. Labao is the largest and most populous country on Briskillanya. It is primarily flat and hot, with the exceptions of the Anthracite, Fafri, Ete, and Alsan ranges. Labao is known for its two enormous lakes, Lake Dasav and Lake Hidasav, which serve as the country's cultural center. Due to Labao's frankly comical enormity, it contains many different climate zones. Most Labaoians live between the diffusely populated Fefet and Sosil deserts and the tropical savannas that dominate the country. Labao's savanna capital, Ofbrel, can be found on the northern coast of Lake Dasav, and many other prominent population centers can be found around both lakes. The Raitlan people live mostly on the Labaoian eastern coast, primarily in the rainforest and monsoon regions. Between the coast and the lakes is the Raitlan rainforest, the planet's largest rainforest, the inner portion of which is too densely forested for people to live in on a large scale. The parts of the savanna not yet mentioned do have major cities, but are more rural than the lake area. Labao's extreme north and south are temperate, unlike the tropical bulk of the nation, and are around as densely populated as the more rural parts of the savanna, though the city of Fafri, which is on the Brasilian coast, is one of the largest cities in Labao. This has the effect of giving Labao two major significantly populated regions, the Dasav-Hidasav region and Raitla, with the rest of the country consisting mostly of rural and diffusely populated areas. Fiora is a very mountainous country, much more than any other country in Briskillanya's southern hemisphere. Fiora was hit particularly hard by the Ice Age, so its coasts have many fjords. Many tiny lakes dot the interior of the country, and the soil is rocky and usually inarable. The receding and melting glaciers also made Fiora South into an archipelago. The highest mountain range in Fiora, the Fioran Mountains, are the source of the country's name, and they cut the country into its two regions, pre-Fiora and post-Fiora. Fiora's high average altitude makes it significantly colder than other places of its latitude. Most of the Fioran lowlands are humid continental, including pre-Fiora, the part of Fiora where most Fiorans live, and where His, the capital of Fiora, is located. Fiora has many arid and semi-arid rain shadows cutting through the wetter parts of the country, even including some hot deserts and steppes, highly unusual spots in the normally cold Fiora. Cut off entirely from the rest of the country by mountains is Fiora's strange little piece of humid subtropical land, which contains many rivers and is primarily wetlands. This region includes the largest swamp on the planet. Fiora's southern coast and islands, while not as densely populated as pre-Fiora, do have some prominent towns along the post-Fioran Sea. At this latitude, subarctic areas exist. The larger post-Ural islands are called Pels, Lelt, Uer, Sult, Hesh, Rochiels, Beskesh, Loeb, and Greenbreek. Fiora's southernmost portion is the small island of New Fiora, which is mostly tundra. Paidin is the second largest Briskillanian continent. The continent is topographically shaped like a gigantic basin. Large mountain ranges exist a few hundred kilometers inland of the coast, while the center is flat and contains significant portions below sea level. The continent's low lat and altitudes make it the warmest one on average. The four outer ranges are, in increasing order of height and decreasing order of age, the Yanakis Mountains in the north, formed by the Kantarochian Plate, the Anpayan Mountains in the south, formed by the Rochian Plate, the Sedini Mountains in the west, formed by the Enian Plate, and the Dorimba Mountains in the east, formed by the western Dehesho Plate. Sedin is mostly flat and low in altitude, with the exception of the Sedini Mountains that form the metaphorical spine of the country. The country is tall, comparatively skinny, and never goes further than 32 degrees from the equator, so it experiences the full range of tropical climates. The country's population is mostly west of the mountains and skews even more strongly towards the coast. The most populous part is the coastal center of rainforest, monsoon regions, savannas, and steppes, the main location of the subkingdom of Sedin proper, and the Sedini capital of Quinter, which has a monsoon climate. This central portion is surrounded on both sides by mild extensions of the Sedini Desert, which are called the Cahobi Desert in the north and the Rahelian one in the south. These deserts are more densely inhabited than other deserts, especially along their coast. Finally, both the far north and the far south are temperate. The Sedini far north contains cold steppes and a small piece of cold desert, and due to the lack of cold ocean current in the area, a comparably large amount of the humid continental climate. This is the territory of the Yanaki subkingdom and the location of Sedin's largest urban areas outside the center. The far south contains a smaller, mostly inland piece of land containing the cold steppe and Mediterranean climates. This region is mostly rural and is dominated by the Shihanian people. The final sovereign country to discuss is Anpai. With the exception of the Anpayan mountain range that constitutes its border, Anpai is very flat and low-lying, and the country has a very low population density. Most of the nation is temperate, including the West Mediterranean portion populated predominantly by Shihanians. The coast, the location of nearly every notable Anpayan population center, are dominated by the oceanic climate, including the capital of Iap. The humid continental north and frigid south are both particularly diffusely inhabited. Finally, there is the great untamed wilderness primarily consisting of the Paidini Desert, called Null Paidin. The Paidini Desert is an absolutely enormous stretch of arid land taking up the majority of its continent. Its poleward pieces are considered to be in the cold desert climate, while the majority of the desert, the central part, is a desert of a tropical temperament. The desert is generally less harsh around its edges and gets increasingly hot, dry, and inhospitable towards the center. While the central desert and Izertaki Plateau have been mapped in detail by the countries that surround them, the Paidini Desert is so large and hostile that Briskillanians possess significantly better maps of Aranev than the interior of this part of their own planet. These inner portions are home to the hottest natural weatherborne temperatures ever to occur on the planet, and some portions are nearly completely lacking in multicellular life. The eastern edge of the Paidini continent is dominated by the Doran Mountains, which contain the tallest peaks in the continent, and produce the extreme rain shadow effect that keeps central Paidin dry. East of these mountains is a thin strip of land often called the Dehesho and Paidini Strip, a diverse region that contains 7 separate climate zones. The majority of this region is, unlike most of Null Paidin, perfectly fit for humid habitation, but uninhabited due to being cut off from the rest of the world by the rugged Doran and Anpayan mountains to the south and west, and the vast Quanta Roch Ocean and very vast Dehesho Ocean to the north and east. The existence of this weird little piece of land is well known across the planet, but little interest exists in colonizing it as of yet, due to its awkward position and the risky politics of such an act. The area has seen some exploration in the past. For example, a Yenithi expedition once did go to the strip to set up a trading post, but they were so creeped out by the complete lack of natives that they abandoned the area. I find it necessary to apologize for how delayed this episode was, how long it is, especially when I said this one was to be a short one last time. I nonetheless hope that you enjoyed watching it, and I thank you for choosing to watch it.